In this video, we look at three sequence diagrams, one for issuing books, the second one is for returning books, and the third one is for removing books. So let's look at issuing books, the design aspects. One is where should you be searching for a member? When a member approaches the actor, the library staff member, and wants to check out books, they have to produce their identification number. And using this identification number, the system has to retrieve the corresponding member object. The member objects are stored in the collection member list. That is what we have decided. So we can think of two different options. One is to have an object that is residing outside the collection, gets an iterator or an enumeration of all the member objects, and then checks to see if one of them has an ID that is matching the ID of the person, the member who is wanting to check out books. That is one option. That is, we have an object that is doing the search outside of the collection. The second one is to delegate the entire responsibility to member list. So let's see what we should select, what we should choose as the way to retrieve the member object. If you think about it, we have this collection, and what is the purpose of a collection? The purpose of a collection is to add members to the collection, retrieve members from the collection, search for members from the collection. Yes, search for members, so that we would be not violating anything by making the member list collection, member list class, member list object do the searching for the member and retrieve the member object. We could do the first option too, but the second one is better because that is the primary function of a collection. But then when do we get an iterator or an enumeration from the collection? That we do when we have to do things that are not central to a collection. For example, suppose you want to get a list of all members who haven't checked out books. I'm just coming up with an example. That is not truly a function of a collection, right? It is a little more applied, little more specific. It is not a general functionality of any collection. So those things you would do outside of the collection. But something like searching for a member is a primary function of a collection. So we should be choosing this option. A second aspect is, where do you put the code for issuing? One thing is for sure, we should not be having the logic for issuing in the user interface, because the user interface should not be performing any business logic. That is for sure. One could say that maybe the member or the book class could be doing the logic, but that is also not appropriate, because we will need to manipulate both the member object as well as the corresponding book object for issuing. So we don't want members and books to be coupled to each other. So it is better to have this logic put in the library class itself. The other issue is the generation of due date. Where should we come up with the due date for a book? Think about it. The due date for a book is 1 month from the date of issue. There is absolutely no other parameter involved. For example, it doesn't really depend upon whether there are more holds on a book. It doesn't depend upon any other factors. And coming up with the date that is 30 days ahead can be done anywhere. It could be done in any Java class. So that alone doesn't constrain where the logic could be placed. But then what is the other consideration? The due date has to be stored in the book. So every book should have a field that says what the due date is. So it would be most appropriate to generate the due date in the book class, and so that we can store that due date directly in the field in the book object. So when you are writing or drawing sequence diagrams, you should be thinking about all these issues and then draw the final sequence diagram. As you are drawing the sequence diagram, you will encounter these issues, or these issues could be discovered even before we start drawing the sequence diagram. In any case, it is not just a matter of drawing the sequence diagram, it is also a fact that a lot of thought has to be going in for the design aspect. So let's now look at the sequence diagram for issuing books. As you set out to draw the sequence diagram, think about the objects that would play a role in the process. Obviously, we have to have the user interface, because that is where you supply all the data, the member ID, the book ID, and so on and so forth. And the library has to be involved, because we said the orchestration of the issuing of the book will be carried out in the library object. There is a member object involved. So the member class would be, or the methods of the member class would be playing a role. We have to search for a member, so the member list has to be in the sequence diagram. A book is being issued, so the book object has to be there, and we have to search for a book, so the catalog class also should be here. And of course, there is the actor. So the actor requests to issue books, and the interface asks for the member ID. As you can see, all the objects are present before we start the process of issuing books. The member who gets the book issued, the book, all have to be present. So the interface initially gets the member ID, and we have to verify that that ID is correct. So the interface requests the library to search for the membership. So we get one more method for the library class here. Given the member ID, it should search for a membership. So this is one more method. And what does the library do? It searches for the member in the member list class, and that comes back with either true or false. Now, let's assume that the member is present. So we are going to go into a loop, as you can see, where each book is issued in one iteration of the loop. So as you go through these sequence of method calls, one book gets issued. So the interface asks for the book ID. The interface calls the issue book method of a library, passing the book ID and member ID. We have to search for the book. And remember that this library doesn't retain the member who is currently looking to get books issued. So this member has to be searched again in the member list, and then we have to have two things done. The member should be updated. The member object should be updated so that we can record the fact that this member has been issued this book. And the second thing is the book has to be updated for the due date, as well as the fact that we can indicate here that it is currently borrowed by this particular member. So that is one way of checking that there is, or checking that the book is currently issued. And the result of issuing is returned. Notice that we called the methods in member and book for issuing books issue. So the member object is called with the issue method for this book, and the book object is called to execute the issue method with this member as the parameter. Then we have the interface asking the clerk if there are more books to be issued, and we have the loop. The next sequence diagram is for returning books. And obviously, you might be getting a hang of it actually, that the library is again going to orchestrate the whole show. So there is a loop here, as you can see, where we get the book ID. And when we get one more method for the library class, that is the return book with the book ID, we call the search method of catalog to verify that the book exists. And then we need to call the return book method on the book object, that is the object that is being returned, which will tell us who was issued that book. So the return book method of book will look at that book object. There is a member ID field, rather member field. So this book will be able to return the member object. And then we can check whether there is a hold on the book. If there is a hold, we need to have this book set aside. So we need to display a message to the clerk saying that there is a hold. And we need to mark that the member has returned the book. So that would be done through this method called return book on the member object. And more books can be returned by asking the actor if there is a book to be returned or one more book to be returned. And if the person says yes, we loop again. And the sequence diagram doesn't really show what is being printed here. This result would involve things like the status of the book, whether there is a hold or not. Finally, in this video, we are looking at removing books. There is some new stuff here, which new notation that we haven't seen in the previous sequence diagrams. Otherwise, it is a pretty straightforward one. We have to remove one or more books. So the sequence diagram involves a loop. After invoking the functionality, the interface asks for the book ID, and we discover one more method the library has to support, and that is remove book, and we are passing the book ID. As usual, we verify that the book exists, and a book cannot be deleted or removed if there is a hold on it. So we check whether the book has a hold. Only the book knows whether there is a hold on it. And then we also cannot remove the book if it has been checked out. So we ask whether there is a borrower for it at this point. And we are now going to remove the book from the library, which means removing the corresponding entry in the catalog, and that is done by this remove method on the catalog. The catalog is a collection, and remove is a very familiar operation in a collection. So we are telling the catalog to remove this book, and you can see that there is something new here, can delete book. This remove method is called only if the book can be deleted, and we haven't really said what the criterion for it is. We have that actually in the use cases. A book can be deleted if it has no hold and has no borrower. So that is understood. We haven't written that explicitly here. That would be unnecessary complication. That is one notation here. The other notation to observe is that the removal of the book. The UML notation for that is to actually issue a call to the book object and then put the X symbol saying the book has been destroyed, or the book object has been destroyed. And you can see that from this point, from the intersection of the two straight lines here, there is no continuation of the lifeline, these dotted line, meaning the object doesn't live after this point. And we print a result. So typically what we would expect is an informative message to be displayed here. So an appropriate result has to be returned. In many cases, the result would be an integer. In some cases, it would be an object. An integer can be given different values for different error codes, and we could probably have 0 for everything being okay.